everyone, just a heads up, this video that you're currently watching goes over the planning process for an initiation ceremony, so everything leading up until the day of the ceremony. We do have a second part, second video that goes over how to actually run the initiation ceremony, some details on that. But because the initiation ceremony must be kept secret, that video is not made public. So if you want access to that video to get a little bit more guidance on how to actually run the ceremony, you can email us at chapter.development@tbp.org. Please include your info, your name, and what chapter you're from. We'll verify your member status, and then we'll send that video along to you within a couple days after you email us. So just a heads up. Thank you.
I will be harping on this multiple times throughout the evening, but advanced planning is the key to a successful initiation. So the more work you put in ahead of time, the more successful your initiation is going to be. I realize many of you are already in the midst of your semester, so you're kind of just going to have to work with what you've got and the time you have. But if you haven't done this before, when you start planning for your winter or spring terms, work backwards from when you want to have your initiation date and plan things back using that as kind of the fixed point in time. Always keep in mind that you need to have approval prior to your initiation. Typically that comes from email. If you don't get initiation approval, then if you don't have it by email, make sure you give a call to headquarters, email us so that we can get that approval to you. Your report of election and catalog cards are due 2 weeks prior to initiation. We do give extensions if that's going to be a problem. Ideally, if you can get it to us 3 to 4 weeks in advance, especially if you want keys, certificates, and membership cards for your ceremony. Your report of eligibility is due within the first 5 weeks of the semester. You also want to be thinking about any banquet, meal, celebration that you're going to be doing after initiation. Get that planned as early as possible. You want to identify your space for the initiates to gather prior to the ceremony. So obviously, many of you are probably familiar with doing virtual initiations, but an in-person ceremony, it's important to have a room set aside for people to gather that isn't the actual initiation room. You want to reserve your initiation room as soon as possible, usually at the start of the term. And the president and vice president should read instructions and the script itself as soon as possible during the semester so that you're well prepared in advance of different things you may not be aware of. So around 2 weeks before your initiation, make sure you've visited, verify, inspecting the room for initiation. This is something that's critically important. Ed and I can share all kinds of interesting stories about rooms we've had to deal with for our model initiation at convention. Those of you who were at convention this year and saw the model initiation, for example, you know that we had to deal with some AV issues this year. We've had to deal with a room with a fixed lab table in the front, so it's hard to set up a 12-foot table when there's a mounted table in the front of the room. So those are all things to just think about as you're getting close to the ceremony. Make sure you're soliciting who your speakers are going to be, anyone who's going to be participating in the ceremony. Distribute reading parts in advance so people have some time to review that, get comfortable with their parts prior to the ceremony. Make sure you're testing the initiation equipment to make sure it's functional. Sometimes you'll have bad light bulbs, maybe frayed wiring, and those are all things that can be fixed as long as you notice that in advance. And make sure you schedule time to practice. That could be maybe the hour before the ceremony, but ideally if you get people together just to practice reading in advance, that's important. Also make sure people are properly dressed for the ceremony. Think a job interview. So with virtual initiations that have been going on for several years, people could pretty much wear whatever they wanted to wear to a ceremony. For in-person initiations, it's typically business formal type of apparel for initiation ceremonies. So the day of the initiation, you should prepare a list of candidates, ideally 2 to 3 candidate lists, one for the presider for the ceremony, and then a couple for the assistants who will be checking people off to make sure who's present. It also helps to have a space to make sure you get phonetic spellings of candidate names so that they're properly pronounced during the ceremony. The initiation team should try to plan to arrive 2 to 3 hours in advance to get everything set up, deal with any issues, test the equipment, review the roles. You also want to tie bows separately or on keys. So Tau Beta Pi sells brown and white ribbon to pin on candidates following the ceremony. Those can be, as I mentioned, attached to the keys or done separately if you don't have keys in advance. You ideally want to set out keys, certificates, and cards, and all team members should be there about 60 minutes prior to the ceremony so you can do a last-minute run-through, answer questions, and resolve any problems. So as I said, you can practice, give yourself 30 to 45 minutes to practice run through the ceremony prior to the start. In that hour before the ceremony, you should have your initiates arriving at that alternate room 30 to 60 minutes so that they can be, as I said, collect phonetic pronunciations, collect initiation fees, any late catalog cards. There is a sheet of paper that it's called Information About the Ritual that you can distribute to candidates that talks about the solemn pledge that we make during the ceremony, talks about word usage so that the candidates know what they're going to experience during the ceremony and you can answer any questions ahead of time. You're going to organize initiates into groups by eligibility type. For most of you, that's typically you just have students, and undergraduate or graduate students, they're all kind of organized together alphabetically by last name. Sometimes you will have alumni candidates who are seated separately and organized differently, or perhaps eminent engineers who are also organized separately and sit separately. Remind everybody about cell phones, about keeping them turned off and muted. And obviously there's no photography or video recording of the initiation ceremony. And then there is a piece for the guide that is read before you enter the initiation room. A couple comments about mistakes. They happen. Don't worry about it. Keep moving on. Ed and I can tell you all kinds of words that can be mispronounced, and we'll touch on them a little bit later. Just instruct everybody to keep going. Most people, this is the only time they're going to ever hear the ceremony, so they won't realize that there are any mistakes that happens. And practice is a big key of proper word pronunciation and making sure everybody knows how to handle the unexpected things that will inevitably turn up. So supplies for initiation, and we'll dive into a little bit more of some of these details in a few minutes, but you should have your initiation kit, a tablecloth, a roll book and pen, your actual ritual script, keys and certificates, and I make a note on there, signed, because when you receive your certificates, there's a blank for the chapter president and the secretary to sign. So keep in mind before you distribute them that your president and secretary should sign those. And you will either have membership cards to distribute, and if you don't have membership cards, there are creed cards. Make sure you have pins to pin bents on candidates. And if you don't have the keys, most chapters are encouraged to just pin the ribbon on candidates, and also flashlights, especially for the guides and the guides' assistants to help guide people to their seats, especially if the room is extremely dark. It's also good to have a couple spare flashlights up at the head table in case there are unexpected power outages or light outages during the ceremony.
I want to throw one thing out. So the instructions say a dark room. Please do not do anything illegal. Turning off exit signs, lights on stairs. Those all violate fire code. So don't do that. We don't expect the room to be completely dark. I was at an initiation where the chief advisor got a little carried away, decided to unscrew the light bulbs on all the stair lights. and an initiate tripped and almost fell on the person in front of him. So keep the room safe, but make it as dark as you can. So close curtains and turn off lights. That's all we really ask.